I live close to Site 41. I also serve on the Federation of Agriculture as a director, and I would like to make it very clear that I am a NIMBY, that I, however, would be preferred to call a stakeholder, which I think everyone should be called, and not in my backyard. I care what's around me, and I care what's happening to my community, and I am strongly opposed to Site 41, so I just wanted to get that out of the way right at the beginning and show my bias. But it wasn't without good reason, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about. So this is actually my father-in-law. This is our combine. We harvest our corn in the fall. My father-in-law is 79 years old. When this picture is taken, he's now 81. And it's pretty important to us that the land is kept in a pristine manner. As many generations within my family have farmed in the area. This is my grandfather on my side of the family. He lived on the 3rd of Tiny Township, close to the Wye River. The Wye River goes to the back of his farm. My husband and I now have the farm that he's on, and actually my father-in-law's picture is combining at that same farm. My grandfather lived to be 98, drinking the water in the area of Site 41, and my grandmother is still living, and actually I think went to Rama last week in her high 80s. So I just want you to know that the water is really good in our area, and these are his horses he had when he first was quite young. I couldn't get a year the picture was taken. No one in the family was quite sure. So I added this slide last night because there was discussion yesterday about the Alliston Aquifer, and we did an overlay map as to where it's located. And this is actually where the red dot on the top is where Site 41 is located. You can see the proximity to Georgian Bay, and the community just prior to Site 41 is Elmville, where everyone turns to go to Wasaga Beach. So I'm not sure if that kind of gives you an idea. We're about a half hour north of Barrie, and the Alliston Aquifer map, the overlay is actually from a Ministry of the Environment map. And it shows that the Alliston Aquifer starts at the community of Wyeville. There's a ridge there. And it traveled all the way down and continued on. And it kind of made it a little bit more apparent to people what's really going on underground. And this was determined by the MOE from groundwater testing. That map is not available anymore. So I guess we all understand that groundwater is in its infancy, hydrogeology. And maybe more accurate mapping will happen soon, I hope, as to what's going on underground. So these are the reasons that I'm hoping to keep the water pristine. These are my 3 sons that are interested in especially my oldest son, interested in farming. It's really important that farmers think about the next maybe 2 generations. Quite a bit. We talk about what the plans are and what to do if this happens or that happens. And I always found it quite interesting with First Nations issues. They go a step further. They go 7 generations they talk about in a consistent manner. And it's a way of thinking that I think is a really good idea. So I live beside the tiny marsh. It's a huge wetland area. I'm very lucky. It's a significant amount of birds, as Kate would tell you. Kate's a birder, and just a tremendous amount going on there at all times of the year with nature. It used to be farmland. There's about 5 farmers who got purchased out. This area used to grow cranberries. Now it's a natural reserve. It's worked on, actually it does allow hunting at it as well at certain times of the year, but it's for us, we go there quite a bit with our bikes. It's got boardwalks. It's beautiful. And there's another marsh just up in Midland at the Wye Marsh. And for myself, I feel like these two areas should be connected with a pathway for nature. This, again, is the tiny marsh. So the agriculture in the area, my husband and I operate a dairy farm. We have 600 acres that we farm, and some of it's woodlot. We milk about 55 cows. New venture is sheep. In the area, there is quite a selection of agriculture practices: horticulture, dairy farms, beef and cattle, sheep and chicken farms, and the list goes on. It's a very varied area for agriculture. Besides Site 41, for me, it was when I first went to the meeting, my two brother-in-laws actually have dairy farms right beside the site. I'm just around the 3-kilometer mark away from Site 41. For me, it just seems ill-conceived where 1 million liters of milk are produced annually just on these 3 farms adjacent to Site 41, that we would consider polluting the water resource and possibly allowing milk that maybe wouldn't meet a standard. So the area is Class 1 and 2 farmland, is artesian flows. So many of the water supplies for the agriculture community is just a pipe in the ground. And unfortunately, the Ministry of the Environment does not accept this as a licensed well, or they consider it not really, even though it's a very pristine way of getting your water source. Our groundwater quality and quantity is high. We knew it was high. We just couldn't prove it. And when Dr. Shattuck brought forward his results, it kind of blew the doors off the county building, because they knew they were wrong, and they wouldn't admit it for a while. But it was quite an amazing occurrence. It really buffered the community who had suffered over many years as a result of this, over 20 years of this proposal weighing on you. So our crops, we have a combination of cropping. What you do is you tend to use your crops in a rotation. So we do wheat, corn, soybeans, and hay. And we rotate that. It's better for the soil, and it's we've never had a crop failure. My father-in-law, who's farmed since the 50s, have never had a crop failure. We're very lucky with the area we live in. So my father-in-law and mother-in-law, they immigrated from Holland in 1955, and they've dairy farmed in the area ever since moving up here from Aurora. They spent a year or two down there. My personal family's side of the family, my mom's from the Wyville area, my dad's from the Elmville area, and it's really important to me to be involved in the community. Both of my families were from farm backgrounds. Okay, so Simcoe County is one of the largest counties in Ontario, and it's very diverse. Mostly it's 1 to 4 farmland, with the exception of the northern parts of Ramera and Severn, which is the northern parts. And it's got a granite bedrock underneath it. So we're really lucky in Simcoe County because we have potential for huge growth or market because of our proximity to cities. With Toronto being so close, it's in the future, even Barrie is becoming quite a metropolis that it's a good place to be, and the ease of the market will hopefully help. I looked at a program that evaluated the area in 1996. It said there was $235 million worth of agriculture products sold in Simcoe County, and about just under 6,000 people relied on jobs from that, and that's not the spin-off trades. And the one thing that farmers will say is if you you give farmer money, it immediately goes back into the economy. So our local area has the two wetlands and also the Wye River, which is a significant, with many branches, and is quite a beautiful spot that we live. So our proximity to Georgian Bay helps us to receive the adequate rainfall, and that's why we've been so lucky not to have crop failures. In the dry months, summer months, the crop roots are able to tap into the generally high water table of our area. So stress on the crops is rare, and the crop yield losses due to low rainfall are compensated by the plant's ability to tap into the groundwater moisture. There are only a very few farmers who irrigate in our area. I can only think of 3, and I know quite a few in the area, and 2 of them are horticulture and 1 is a strawberry farm. So it's not something we're lucky that we don't need to do presently. There's not a lot of potatoes or vegetables grown in the area. There is some, but that is a crop that tends to have more need for that. So I got involved with Site 41 after attending a meeting in 2003, and I knew nothing about it. I've almost been there, I guess 19 years I've been married. Didn't know anything about it because it was such a long process early on, and it wasn't until 2003 till the County of Simcoe came up with their plan. And so my brother-in-law asked me to attend a meeting in Wybridge, and I knew nothing about landfills. I did not know anything about the certificate of approvals, and I just went to listen. But after attending that event, it was very apparent that it was a really bad idea. It was almost immediate after arriving. It was a very technical presentation the County of Simcoe presented, yet there was no documentation for anyone to use or take home. And the risks outlined by the engineer, Doug Jagger, were so apparent. He encouraged us to realize that there is a risk that if they had too much water pressure under the lining system, that it could create a blowout. And that to prevent that, they were going to have this lagoon in Midland, sewage sludge, trucked immediately. So when they put the lining system down, that they would put the sewage sludge on top to hold it in place. And at the same time, that they would lower the groundwater table to ensure that there was no, to not impact on the lining system while they installed it and did their welding, and they needed dry weather to do so. So for us, it made me realize that this was really not a good idea, and we had just come through Walkerton. We knew that there was not maybe the oversight needed by the Ministry of the Environment. And when they talked about pumping out 830,000 liters a day to an estimate to lower the groundwater table, it certainly put a red flag. So I was most discouraged when at the end of the meeting, when it was time for the public to ask questions, they wouldn't allow any questions. They said if you wanted to ask questions, they would allow you to come back the following day. So, and you could talk one-on-one with the consultant, right? So a lot of people, especially if they don't know very much, they're not going to go to a meeting. They want to hear what someone with more knowledge than them, what the question they ask, and hear the answer, and especially if they're not an assertive person. So it just seemed totally irresponsible not to allow the public that little bit after 30, almost 20 some years of being held hostage. So in spite of that, several people stood up and wouldn't allow that, and they did maybe get 3 questions. And one was the question was about the lining system that Steve had talked about earlier. And they talked about this big mistake that they'd already made in regards to the water infiltration. And they said, well, the lining system isn't actually to protect the groundwater resource, it's actually to stop the inflow into the garbage. And One of the gentlemen at the meeting, I think it was the Leonards, Daryl Leonard, indicated that one hole could negate the whole lining system. So if you think about it, I think of it as like a rubber boot, and you get a hole in it, it fills up with water. And so they were saying that the lining would serve no purpose if there was a hole the size of my head. So this was a real big shock to me, and I got to tell you, I felt it was so ill-conceived that I told my husband that we would have this fixed in maybe 6 months, because it was just so ridiculous that I don't know how anyone would even consider it. And I'd kind of come off volunteering on a few things, and he really didn't want me taking on another project. So that was in 2003. So Dump Site 41 is a proposed engineered, state-of-the-art landfill site, is what the County of Simcoe would have you believe. It's on several aquifers and in the floodplain. So their own documents at the county and the township have identified this area as a flooding potential and risk. So I just couldn't believe it. So at the back of the site, there's a river. It's called the McDonald's Creek, and it drains into the Wye River. And it is like a swale that went through the site, and it would join into the McDonald Creek. So we were concerned that all this water, they're going to have to do something with it. They're going to pump it into the river, and it will have no effect. We're not to worry. Don't worry about the fish in the river. Don't worry that we have the Wye Marsh at the end of this. So it was hard to believe anything they said, because it didn't make sense. So after the meeting, I went home and I tried to find out a bit more from the County of Simcoe. Wouldn't forward me any documents. They wouldn't give me the Community Monitoring Committee's reports. The Community Monitoring Committee was established to be a liaison with the public, and I couldn't believe, after reading their mandate, how the county would possibly allow it not to be out in the public. So that's red flags. If somebody doesn't want to share information when they're saying it's a great, you should back up and try to understand why they're not letting you know the information. So I talked to the area farmers trying to understand what brought us to there, and they told me that they thought the county was crazy to build in such a sensitive area. And they told me that during the Hurricane Hazel that that farm was completely underwater. And unfortunately, the farmers in the area, even though they turn the soils, they understand quite a bit about many things, they were ignored. So in 1954, when the Hurricane Hazel came in, I'd just like to read you a little paragraph from a historical book. It was one of the worst natural disasters to hit the township of Tiny on October 15th of 1954. Heavy rains caused flooding, and practically everyone was affected in one way or another. The southern part of the township, which is where Site 41 is located, was the worst hit in the area, and few realized what was happening during that 24-hour period in which the rain poured down. It wasn't until Saturday morning, October 16th, that the full realization began to dawn on the residents and officials. Hundreds of acres of farmland were flooded, homes flooded, railways and roads severed, telephone and hydro lines were knocked down, trees blown over, and livestock drowned. Tiny Township Road Superintendent Les Spring said the thousands of dollars of damage were done to roads, bridges, and culverts throughout the township. In fact, 5 bridges washed out. 3 were at the McDonald's Creek on the up to the 4th concession. So Site 41's on the 2nd concession, and the McDonald Creek meanders all the way through there. So you can see what this is with the east upland region. It's what created this water. So when I contacted Rob McCullough, the gentleman we've seen that beautiful film of today, he's the one who would deny me the CMC reports, by the way, the minutes. And I just told, finally, after persistently calling him, that I would have to apply through the Freedom of Information Act. So the committee's mandate was established for the purpose of providing community review of the development, operation, ongoing monitoring, closure, and post-closure care related to the landfill site. So I finally did get my way. It took a while. I held a public meeting and asked people to come and tell me about what had happened, and with the couple people from the neighborhood. And a lot of people didn't know about it. It wasn't just me. It was such a long, protracted issue, and actually the YY Citizens Group had acted in such an amazing manner. They had really beat it. They brought alternatives to the table. They were ignored. They put their, one lady put her farm on the line to mortgage the hearings. It was amazing what they did, and I'm so proud of them when I read through it, and I didn't know anything about it. So kind of set the bar pretty high, and even though it was kind of a done deal, we were told, it wasn't within reason. So when I had my public meeting, Rob McCullough actually showed up at it, and I had written a little thing about why people should come, that the lining system could leak and that there was a potential blowout. And in it I wrote that the lining system could fail within 20 years, which is from a study I'd received off the internet. So at the next Community Monitoring Committee meeting, he took notes all meeting, and I actually gave him all the documentation I had prepared because I was trying to be open and transparent. At the CMC meeting, the next meeting, he actually told me that the County of Simcoe could sue me because I had said that the lining system would leak, and they are good for 100 to 150 years. So I just didn't know my stuff. So that was my first experience. I've never had anything like that happen to me with government. I've always had a good relationship with my community and the leadership within it. So it was a big shock to me. So after that, the peer review process happened. Dixon Hydrogeology, Severn Sound, and the Golder Associates. They exposed, as Steve had mentioned, over 200 combined errors. And Dave Stasif reported that 12 to 24 errors are more common for this type of project. So we kind of felt like this guy maybe is going to get it, and he's going to ensure that if it does go in, he'll make it safe or at least hold them accountable, because he was questioning them. Unfortunately, the senior engineer and hydrogeologist, Dave Stasif of the MOE, was moved to the Ministry of the Transportation shortly after that statement was made, within a month. So since that time, the 2004 annual report, Gordon Miller, he's the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, and it's a really important thing to know. You write 2 letters, 2 signatures. 2 different people can apply when they feel there's a problem with the Ministry of the Environment or environmental issues. And his name is the ECO, Environmental Commissioner of Ontario. And he actually came up with an annual report, and he expressed concerns over the MOE's failure to review Site 41. How can a 20-some year project look just right still? It just... So we started to realize that to fight this battle would be expensive and tremendous problems, because I didn't have $100,000 to hire a hydrogeologist and $200,000 for a really good lawyer or whatever it needed, a lobbyist. So we decided, we already knew why we were opposed to it. We had proof of that from all the work Steve Ogden had done and repeatedly did. That we decided that politics, there's only 32 county councillors, hopefully we can convince 16 of them that this was a bad idea. And it would cost us a lot less money. Unfortunately, at that time, Warden Tony Georges was in the picture. He was the Springwater Township mayor, and he had campaigned on the fact that he would oppose Site 41. His literature said it. We had taped an all candidates meeting. And unfortunately, it went to the floor of the County of Simcoe in 2006, and we lost 16 to 15 in a split vote. People felt betrayed, and they approached council meeting in Springwater, the people of Springwater, and that was important. It was a very important step to make Mr. Georges understand he was going to be held accountable for lying to the public. There was a huge turnout. My father was there. My father tenders county forests. He has a sawmill operation. Unfortunately, Tony Georges approached him and said to him, why are you here? You do business with the county of Simcoe. My whole dad's business is, he hires 30 people and they all rely on a job, and it was really tough for me. So I guess I should talk about the effects on farmers. With what the plan was to dewater the site, they were going to put restrictions on water taking permits in the area. And we were concerned that it would affect these beautiful crops that we received. And we were told that the ministry official, John Gasberry, that the county could pollute the groundwater at the boundary by 50%. And if this were to become an attenuation site, they could actually pollute it by more as long as they owned the land. So the county, in the meantime, had purchased the farm to the east, had put an offer on the farm to the north. So it was like they were planning already for it to become polluted. So for dairy farmers, we actually have to have potable water. The dairy farmers of Ontario met, and they self-regulate things that they feel should happen. And so they've regulated that in their members need to have potable water, and if not, they have to take steps to ensure that their water's safe. So you can imagine how worried I was for especially close by. Unfortunately, construction did start in 2008, even though we had such great support. It was really heartbreaking. The people in the area were so devastated. The farm to the north, her name is Kathy Gradana. She's a minister in Holly, and what happened to her family with this offer on her farm, when they were out for the evening, a lawyer for North Simcoe Waste Management dropped off a check to her children for the farm, and they came home to crying children. This was many years ago. So the people that are really close to the site, they are so heartfelt, because they had to look at that every day. I'm sorry, I'm very emotional. This is who I am. So to kind of bring attention, Steve, who is really busy, got asked by Danny Beaton to take a little walk, and they decided to go to Toronto from our Site 41. And it was a rally for everyone. And then, sorry.
And to do that, just catch your breath. Take a glass of water.
This is a frequent occurrence, by the way. So, May 4th, May of 2009, we decided we were going to have a walk. We'd kind of lost our potential. People were telling us we should give up. Tony Georges was still warden of Simcoe County, and we'd received threatening letters. The one that Steve received, I'd received a copy, and some other members of the CMC. So we decided it would be good to have an event, because everybody was kind of pushing we should do something, but been doing it for a while, but it changed from this day. The walk was the first step, and the people who showed up, we thought maybe 50 people would show up. It was unbelievable, and it was a bright spot finally. From that walk, Beth, who's here,
right here.
Yeah, Beth called, and she wanted to participate in the walk. And they felt compelled to take a further step and create a peaceful protest camp opposite the site, not blocking the gates, just to send a message. And it was quite a powerful thing. And the imagery that happened there, this is one of my favorite pictures of the agricultural community and the First Nations. County tried to push it through. They were going to get it done no matter what, and a step had to be taken, and this is what happened. And inside here, and I'm sure Mr. Black will be talking about Keith and I, another very special farm couple from our area, and I'll let Mr. Black talk about them. So this was before we were blocking the gate, this picture itself, and it was a very strong camp. The bottom right corner here is Kate Harry's, and Kate is very much, used to work for the Globe and Mail and Toronto Star, and she took on the County of Simcoe for us in their press releases, and they had a $250,000 budget just added to their already full-time staff, and it was quite an undertaking that Kate did because they were creating documents like this all the time. So we arranged a tractor rally, and people showed up. I made sure it rained the night before because farmers are really busy in the summer. And we just decided the night before that this was going to happen, and it was just going to go up and down the roads. Unfortunately, at this event, the farmers were told by the police that their tractors could be impounded and removed from them. And it was a really stressful time because we didn't want to get in trouble. We knew all the police officers are good guys, never been in trouble with the law, ever. And there was a bit of an attitude at first. It wasn't real nice. It was when they're going to impound your vehicle for you actually taking your legal right to demonstrate. So I did get in a bit of an argument with an OPP officer that day, and one of the things that happened that was quite funny to me is he told me that nobody was in charge and he's shutting it down. And I said, I'm in charge. If you want somebody in charge, I'm in charge today. And he said, you're not in charge. These farmers aren't going to listen to you. And right at that moment, two farmers came up and said, Anne, what do you want us to do now? And it was just a really hard day because there was a bit of a push. And unfortunately, right after this, there was a gentleman in our community, a handicapped person who was shot by an OPP officer. And the demeanor from the OPP at that time changed because I think there was a bit of they felt there was maybe a wrongdoing. It was a fearful situation, and maybe the officer overreacted or not, I'm not sure. That's still under debate, but it seemed to change. And also because at one of our demonstrations, the First Nations people had a small smudge bowl on this road. And it's a back road. Nobody travels down it other than the area residents until this last summer. But the police told the press that there was, the natives had created a bonfire on the road and it was unsafe. And they closed all the way at the end and at a bridge that I think I showed a picture earlier with the sign over it. It was like a 4-kilometer length of road over that little bowl, cereal bowl. So we were very upset, and we had many of our area residents call and say that we didn't feel it was appropriate and that they had been misrepresented. But unfortunately, there was no retraction of those statements. So those statements go out in the press all the time, and you don't understand that maybe it wasn't exactly as it was told. So you wonder about issues that you've heard about in the past. So, yes?
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but the shooting by the OPP of the man in Elmdale, maybe just for the people who aren't familiar with Site 41, it was completely unrelated.
It was completely unrelated. There was 2 incidences, one in Midland, and it was people who didn't really understand the situation they were. The police approached them. They looked angry. I don't know what happened, but there was 2 men shot, one in Midland and one in Elmville. And so it was a really hard time, I'm sure, with the OPP. It was totally unrelated to Site 41. It was a very terrible thing that happened, and it's regrettable. But I think for those 2 things, it really changed the demeanor. And in fact, we actually felt they were on our side later on. I'll explain a bit more to that. So we had a couple tractor rallies before, but it was drawing a line in the sand a little bit. This is what the camp evolved into, and I'm going to let Kate or Shelley and Beth talk more about that, but it was a pretty special place. There's so many miracles that happened there over one course of one summer. I can't explain to you all the things. It was a special time. This is Site 41, and this is the stormwater management pond. They got approval for that pond with the Ontario Water Resources Act without proper notification. The CMC found out about it about 3 or 4 months afterwards. No chance for input. But you can see the how the water is ciphering in. There would be 3 cells on this to the left of your screen and then 3 more cells. But the water was overflowing all the time, flowing into that, and they hadn't even dug the cells. You can't really see it, but to the right there's like a pathway, and it went through the field and into the McDonald Creek. So people expressed themselves in different ways. There was music and poetry and art, and it was just a really fabulous place. We had potlucks every Saturday night, and the cottagers came, and it was just, something was going on all the time there, and relationships were being built. And we were so lucky to be involved with the First Nations people. We all learned so much. Some pretty great people came on board too. Garfield Dunlop is on the top right there. He's our area MPP, and contrary to kind of what Peggy said, Garfield was in the County of Simcoe when it was first looked at. They had no details as to what the project was. And since, I think, 2003, right when that report came out, he was opposed to Site 41. Vicky, on the bottom right, Vicky and I were both sued by the County of Simcoe. And Vicky was an exceptional person with the press and media. She was like a media darling, and she challenged Tony Georges all the time. And I think that's why she was targeted. Dale Goldhawk on the bottom left, he's a consumer advocate. His radio show 740 AM. He's on every day, Monday to Friday. He's an exceptional person. And David Crombie, he's a former mayor of Toronto. He's a tiny cottager, and just a real phenomenal speech he wrote with Maud Barlow, who's on the right. And some media things they did, and things they did behind the scenes we'll never know. There's so many people who stepped up. It was just a really remarkable time. And this day was a special significance. It was a rally after the injunction and the lawsuit had been charged against myself. And this is what people showed up. Okay. It was a really great day. We had demonstrations at the courthouse. We got arrested. I actually spent a night in jail because the police did not want me to go back to the site, so they tried to get me to sign a condition to agree. My in-laws live right beside the site, my brother-in-laws. We farm in the area, so I couldn't sign it, so I went to jail overnight, which was quite an experience. And the next day, the judge agreed with me that the police had no reason to ask for that condition. And I would have been in violation if I would have went, to drop my children off there. I would have been back in jail, possibly. So I was very glad I didn't do that. This is my dad. The tractor rallies. This is other ways people had of indicating their disbelief. I made the little signs when I first got involved in 03 to kind of let people know what was going on, the Protect Our Water, Stop Site 41. Steve does everything bigger and better. And they were littered all over Simcoe County. We're hoping to remove them once the final approval of the rezoning happens at County of Simcoe, hopefully next month. This is the Site 41 truck. It traveled everywhere, especially where we don't like getting pushed around. My dad painted this truck up after things had happened, and whenever he knew Tony Georges was in town, it was kind of parked beside him or near. So unity prevails. It's a pretty amazing time, and the campsite was just a really remarkable experience. They had the natural flow, the cleanest water in the world, located on the site that Bill had tested, and it was the cleanest water. It was just, it all turned out. And when we approached Art and Lois about them camping there for a weekend, this is what evolved. So being open is really hard. This is Art Parnell. He's a farmer that, he actually lives beside me, but they also own the farm to the south where the cleanest water is. During the site, unfortunately when they were dewatering, when they were constructing, the area wells, there was a well that dropped 1 meter. There was a change in the water at this Purist site. It became particle matter inside the water, which is what we had heard could be a concern when they dewater. They move the fine silts around, and so when you would take water, it would be dirt in it, and it would immediately settle out. But we were told if these things happened, the MOE would step in, there would be no problem, they'd close them down. It never happened. The dust and the trucks and all those things that we talked about earlier, these violations were never checked into by the Ministry of the Environment. So standing up is what Steve always said, and these are school kids. So every day there was somebody new. This is Rob McCullough and Greg Brennan, the site foreman, taking pictures of the protesters. So I'm hoping we start to think about the 7 generations, and I guess that's what I'm about time, Ray? Is that okay? So I'd be willing to accept any questions.